Probably go to the other room first and then come up here slowly, but we're going to begin our talk today. Welcome to the Thursday lecture sponsored by the Center for South Asia. Normally we don't have a lecture today because we have a conference starting actually today, and I was just reminded to announce that the law pre-conference is happening today at 2 o'clock in Lubar Commons, which is going to focus on legal issues of various regions of South Asia, including Pakistan. And we also have a Urdu pre-conference and a Nepal Studies pre-conference and several other pre-conferences. You can go on the Center for South Asia website and see all the pre-conferences. But we were very fortunate to be able to invite Imtiaz Gul here from Pakistan. His travel here is sponsored by the American Institute of Pakistan Studies, and his lecture here is co-sponsored by the Department of Anthropology and the Center for South Asia. Imtiaz Gul is the chairman for the Center for Research and Security Studies in Islamabad. He is a journalist. He hosts talk shows on various TV channels, including TV channels in Pakistan as well as Al Jazeera, and for the Germany overseas news channels. He's been writing for esteemed newspapers in Pakistan, both the English as well as Urdu, and I assume for Pashto as well. But no Pashto papers. You don't publish in them. He's a Pathan anyway. He's from Peshawar, and he has been working on the northwest regions of Pakistan. Now Pakhtunkhwa, or what is it? Pakhtunkhwa. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. I haven't gotten the title yet. Used previously NWFP and FATA, which is the federally administered tribal areas. And since 1988, he's been deeply involved in interviewing and meeting various communities in those regions who have gone under various names, and I'm sure he will tell us all about them today. His talk today, he's published several books, one of them, The Unholy Nexus, Pakistan-Afghan Relations Under the Taliban, and most recently a published book called The Most Dangerous Place. Is that the name of the new title? From Penguin. And the previous title was, I forget, but I bought both of them because I thought they were different.
And the Al-Qaeda Connection.
The Al-Qaeda Connection. And then I found out that they were the same book. But anyway, now I have two versions and you can sign one of each of them, okay?
Whatever you prefer.
So please welcome Imtiaz Gul. He's going to talk to us today about the socio-economic cost of conflict to the people of Pakistan. And I especially asked him to also try to include a little bit about the flooding, the recent flooding, how that's infected the northwest regions as well as other parts of Pakistan, and the continuing so-called war on terror. So please welcome Imtiaz Gul.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark. Thanks to Anita, our first meeting, and thanks to AIPS and the Department of Anthropology. It's a pleasure to be here. The audience seems to be a lot of people very informed, so don't take any offense if I overstate or understate. Mehreen, we have been working together in the Friday Times. What I had thought is just put together a few facts, figures with regard to the conflict and the natural calamity. And the idea was just to, I think, create some sort of awareness on the context of this conflict that has caused so much damage to Pakistan. I mean, we ourselves get lost at times in these crises after the crisis. So that's why I thought, it's a cost of conflict and calamity. So right now, I call it a double jeopardy that Pakistan is caught up in, as if we hadn't enough crises. So first, we were into this counterinsurgency campaign and the resultant blowback from various militant groups. And then we had these super floods, which began on July the 23rd. We had then massive rains on July the 29th. If you look at this was the western rivers basically caused the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab, the deluge on the 29th of July. And from eastern rivers, we had some water, some overflow, but that didn't cause any damage. What we experienced was, you can see how water from these main three rivers eventually merged into one big stream, and when we flew over the inundated areas, only then I think we could grasp the extent of damages. It was like a serpent moving down the hill and traveling down into the south for almost 2,000 kilometers. So it was just moving and displacing people. And here we have another illustration. This is from the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Assistance, the source. The red areas you see, these were affected. And it's all along the course of the Indus River with considerable damage. And Balochistan, if you see to the left, the damages there were caused because simply of the deluge, the overflow, and there were certain dikes which were breached. So, and it's quite interesting that until the July the 29th to 30th, people in Sindh and in Balochistan were praying for rains. Nobody had imagined what is awaiting them. So everybody was praying, and Balochistan was the worst affected, where the underground water table has sunk considerably. And then eventually around the 19th, 18th of August, actually, certain dikes had to be breached. People in Sindh, the influential ones, wanted to protect their lands, their farms. And the water then got into some of the Balochistan areas you see in the red. Now this was the population affected. In Punjab it's almost 1 million, in Sindh 700,000, and Balochistan. So in all it came to almost 20 million. And these were the damages to basically to the houses. I mean, you can imagine most of the houses when it started up in the north, so along the river beds, the Kabul River, the Kunhar River, there were many rivers and tributaries. So when the deluge came, a lot of houses which had been constructed into the river course because there hadn't been any rain. That's why we call it the super flood. We experienced it in like after almost 100 years. So a number of houses were simply swept away. You know, we had a seminar on July the 17th in Kalam in the upper Swat, and part of that hotel is also gone. So you can imagine, you know, just because the torrent was so powerful, the mud structures or smaller structures couldn't withstand that. Now, the impact was basically the settlements, these new settlements that I just spoke about, which had come up in the course of the years, and since there is no enforcement of law, basically, those familiar with Pakistan know it's the governance structures are so weak. So you can get away with many things if you have contacts or if you use money. So, and also in addition to that, there's a lot of daily wage workers, particularly in Sindh, in central Pakistan, where people just found a piece of land and they constructed a mud house. The same happened also up in the north, close to Peshawar, where some towns like Nowshera, which is along the GT road, stood in water 2 meters, over 2 meters for several days. So a lot of houses simply melted. They were mud structures, so they melted into the water. It was quite a devastation. I think in Shapkadar, Charsada, it's another 40-50 kilometers from Peshawar. Most of the houses simply went down. Sorry. Now, what happened from north to the south? That the direct impact was on the food stocks. Now, this is a slide from a survey that World Food Program and the SDPI had conducted, and it had concluded that in the food insecurity in about 2/3 of Pakistani districts, it's slightly less than 2/3, it had gone up from 37% to 48.8% before the floods. And you can see the areas in the red, they were already food deficient, just because there's not enough water. Gilgit-Baltistan up in the mountains anyway, I mean, it's a very cold region. So you can imagine the floods impacted 15 to 20% of the farmlands, the population, and most of them lost food grains. It was stock seeds and the stocks for the rest of the months. Over 1 million small farmers, I think, currently are struggling to find their way back into the farms, into the houses. In Sindh, for instance, I think more than 500,000 farmers, they are really devastated because they cannot sow for the next season. There are certain areas which are lower than the river Indus. So the water there is not going to go away, and they shall have to wait for another few weeks, and that means they have lost. So what they lost was their food stock, the seeds that they had kept for the next crop. So they have to somehow survive until March, when they start the next season sowing. Now, coming to the political conflict, this counterinsurgency campaign that is associated with the meanwhile questionable war on terror that had begun on 7th of October 2001. And I think a lot of you would be aware of the kind of violent response by the Al-Qaeda linked militant groups, suicide bombings, which has created a state of insecurity. And we've been discussing this quite a lot in recent days, that these militants are now attacking basically symbols of a functional state, and they're attacking the tradition. Like if you look at the attacks on mosques, on shrines, they are considered like by Al-Qaeda, by the people, the Wahhabi school of thought people, they consider visiting shrines as shirk, as like un-Islamic. So the militants who are after the interests of Pakistan, they can, I think, dilute the analysis of who is doing this. You know, it's very easy. Many people would say it's the Wahhabis who are attacking the shrines, but I think it's not only Wahhabis, those who are associated with Osama bin Laden. I think it's a lot of crime. It's a lot of anti-Pakistan interest that is at work. So it's easy, you can deflect attention when you are attacking different symbols of a functional state. Sunni processions, I mean, we have seen there in Karachi, in Lahore. So it has been quite a tragedy. I mean, this year, I think since December last year, we have lost several hundred people just because of the attacks on Shia and Sunni processions. Religious scholars have been killed. The latest one was early this month, Dr. Muhammad Farooq. I think we'll come to that later. So if you look at the casualties, it's more than 31,000 deaths in the last 7-8 years. Almost 244 suicide bombings since 2006, when we had about 5 or 6 suicide bombings, a phenomena that Al-Qaeda has brought to Pakistan. The first one we had was on 17th of March 2002 at a church in the diplomatic area of Islamabad. And if you look at the losses of the Pakistan army, it comes to like something like 3,218, and 2009 or 10 operations conducted so far by the Pakistan army. And the number of losses, I think, are more than what Pakistan lost in the war with India in 1965. Police has been the second most preferred target of the militants, particularly since July 2007, when the Red Mosque operation was conducted in the heart of Islamabad, and it gave birth to another force that is called the Ghazi Force, named after one of the brothers responsible, who were leading and running this mosque. And Rashid Ghazi was killed also eventually during the operation. And a number of traces have been actually found in Swat, in Fatah, South Waziristan, that led to the Ghazi force, which has become one of the very, very active forces targeting the police and the army. Now, economic costs, the government keeps claiming that it has lost like $45 billion in the last 8-9 years. I mean, I don't go by what the government says, but if I think you look at the cumulative long-term cost to the society and to the country, I think that has been much more. I mean, you can't really monetize it. If you look how the foreign investments have dried up, foreign tourists almost non-existent right now. When most of the countries advise their citizens to visit Pakistan, I had statistics available which said that $250 million came off foreign tourists in 2006, 2007. But meanwhile, it is practically nothing except for the aid workers, the foreign diplomats that are coming to Pakistan. And no international sports events are taking place. Pakistan had to play its cricket matches at Dubai or at England, English grounds very recently. That also means the loss of money, loss of fun to the Pakistanis. And if you look at the infrastructure, a number of mosques, hospitals, schools, for instance, who is working in Swat. I mean, one of our friends from Italy, you would know, hundreds of schools were blown up in 2009, 2008. There were varying figures, 350 to 400. The USAID has, I think, started reconstruction of about 21 schools, which were totally destroyed by the militants. So this is a cost, actually, the long-term cost is much, much heavier, just because you deprive younger generation of the schooling, of education opportunities. So you can't really monetize that cost. And the same has been true in the federally administered tribal areas, where schools and colleges practically have been shut, particularly in South North Waziristan, in Mohmand, and in Bajawar. Peshawar, it's my city, and this basically symbolizes the cost of conflict, because it is surrounded by 3 tribal regions, 4, I would say, Khyber, Orakzai, Mohmand, and Dara Adam Khelf, basically from 3 sides. It's also a big transit point for most of the people. It's also a transit for the US NATO cargo. Has been in talk the past few days. That's why in early 2009, there was a talk of takeover of Peshawar by militants, and this actually then prompted a military operation in the Khyber Agency, basically in the summer of 2009. If we look at the statistics, the last 18 months or so, 30 suicide attacks in and around Peshawar, including the US attack on the US consulate. It was a very daring incident that took place. I think it was in April. And then look at the devastation in terms of economic costs, that 73% industry has been shut down in the last 3-4 years, which means almost like 30,000 jobs, more than 30,000 jobs. And the SCCI stands for it used to be called Sarhad Chamber of Commerce and Industries. I don't know how they would rename it after the renaming of the province in April this year. This is now called the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But they believe that the province has lost about $35 billion worth of business in the last 6-7 years. Now, this is a collage. I mean, it's what has it resulted in? Individual hunger. I mean, on the one hand, you have this 175 plus million people. On the other hand, you have this big army based on the security state notion. And then the third element is the foreign involvement, the drones. Again, very much in talk. I think the last 6 weeks we have seen like 31, 32 drone attacks in Waziristan. And then the social instability. I think it's a if you look at a number of incidents, somehow this violence has seeped into the general mindset. Frustrations are boiling over, like police being as the silent onlooker when people are lynching alleged criminals or thieves. This happened in Sialkot, and then there was lawyers beating up the policemen. So a number of instances of violence, I think, illustrate the kind of mental state that most Pakistanis find themselves in. Now, what is the results? The challenges. And we have to look at it in the context of the 2007 to 2009 food and fuel prices that went up. Particularly in 2008, international food prices were going up. The fuel prices went up when the dollar, I think the barrel, an oil barrel hit like almost $147. And since we import a lot, so the import bill basically more than doubled for 2008, 2009. And that meant additional pressure on our financial resources. Now, an additional challenge to the financial crunch, to the higher food prices, is the youth bulge. I think 55% at least of the population is under 25. And there's a debate right now going on that how do you look at this youth bulge? If you can, are you in a situation, in a position to harness this? I would say no. So if you can't harness this, then it can turn into a dangerous liability for the state. Poverty remains like 1/3 of 175 million people are below the poverty line. That means they're living off less than $2 a day. That means it's a conducive ground for religio-political groups to exploit the youth in particular. So it doesn't mean that everybody can fall prey to these groups, but then there are people particularly in the northwestern areas, in central Punjab, in South Punjab, which is like 42 million people. These people, I think, can easily then recruit certain youth idling around with no perspective for a job or for education, where education institutions or these technical education institutions are closed down. So what do? They will go to the mosque and perhaps they stumble into somebody who is looking for the prey. So this is the danger, I think, that is omnipresent in Pakistan right now. Simply the numbers are mind-boggling. I mean, if you were to say 5% people could fall prey to the militants or to the religio-political groups, just you can, I think, calculate 5% of 175 million people. Again, it runs into a few millions. Now, the overall picture right now, as a result of the counterinsurgency campaign and then the floods which have displaced millions of people, what is the risk, the danger? Relapse of militancy in areas cleared in Swat or in South Waziristan. South Waziristan was not like hit by the floods, but we're just not talking in general terms. Then the growing vulnerability of the poor to look up to Islamist networks for help. This happened during the earthquake of October 2005, when a number of Islamist foundations, charity organizations then jumped into the field and were in the forefront of helping out the affected people. The same happened again after the floods. Another danger is the emergence of new criminal gangs, or the youth joining some of the existing gangs, because that's a shortcut. I spoke with a number of people early this year in Swat, in Upper Swat. Why did they join Maulana Fazlullah's army? Now you can imagine, there's no school, no college, the young man doesn't have a job, so it's it's very, very attractive for a young man when he's told, come join us. We'll give you a gun, give you a couple of thousand rupees a month, and you can go around, tell them, I have joined the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. So it gives you clout, influence. And that's how a number of young people join Maulana Fazlullah. It's good fun, adventure for them. It basically places them above many others, young fellows. So that is, I think, always one attraction for these people. Now, the obstruction, any hope for reform? I would say this is a debate that has engaged us for the past few months. That is the ruling elite, that would mean the politician as well as the army, in a position, in a mood to help this country, help those people living in poverty, the dispossessed. Because I myself think that most of the ruling elite is sort of insensitive, self-serving, and the parliament symbolizes basically this ruling elite, which is almost 2/3 of the landlords and their kith and kin in industry and business, big businesses. So they have, these cross-sectoral relationships. One brother is in the military, the other one is running an industry, the third one is sitting in the parliament. So they together, I think, then enjoy considerable clout within the society. And also this security state paradigm has landed us in trouble. The nation is trapped in debt and defense. Almost 80% of the total budget, available financial resources, go into the debt servicing, and about 30%, I think, goes into the defense. Misgovernance, they are based on nepotism and cronyism. I don't see much hope that this country can go forward, just because the latest example was that the Prime Minister appointed one of his friends who had not done even his O-levels as the managing director of a gold mine we call the Oil and Gas Development Corporation. And this was a $20,000 a month job. That basically illustrated Pakistan's crisis of misgovernance, that those ruling don't realize what their decisions mean, and they think they can get away with any decision. In this instance, the Prime Minister couldn't get away with that just because there was so much uproar against this, and he had to reverse. Basically, the Supreme Court actually came to rescue, and the Prime Minister had to take that back. So in the current circumstances, I would say perhaps the Supreme Court offers some glimmer of hope. It's an upheaval that Pakistan is currently going through, with different institutions trying to assert themselves. Supreme Court, which is taking a number of suo motu actions on government decisions, and secondly, probably the electronic media. It is nascent, like almost 8 to 9 years old, but it has really helped. If there were no private electronic media, probably we wouldn't have seen the restoration of the Chief Justice, because we could see his pictures being flashed all over the country, and which were going beyond the borders of Pakistan as well. So the only glimmer of hope is, I think, the judiciary, which is trying to assert itself not only vis-a-vis the parliament, but also vis-a-vis the ruling elite. I don't know to what extent can it also take on the mighty military establishment. I hope someday the events today somehow pave the way for the Supreme Court and the judiciary to also question the mighty military establishment at some stage. So, thank you very much.
Okay, so we have some time for some questions. If anybody wants to, please leave it. If there's anybody who has some questions.
If Obama invited you to advise him about what to do in regard to Pakistan, what would you say?
A job opening.
Certainly not. Well, number one, I think I would advise Obama not to treat Pakistan as a project, to treat it as a partner that needs continuous engagement, a partner whose leaders need to be reined in through conditions for aid, assistance, whatever is flowing out of Washington, from Washington, from the IMF, from the World Bank. There has to be strict conditions to that. So the ruling elite, whether it's the military or the parliament and the government, cannot enrich themselves. There has to be ways and means have to be found which help in the intellectual enrichment of the nation, not of the monetary enrichment of the ruling class.
I have two short questions. The first is, when you were talking about poverty in Pakistan at about 35%, 1/3 of 175 million,
Yeah,
I think those figures were before the flood, is that correct?
yeah, sure.
Because, I mean, I think that's been one of the most devastating impacts, is that we're all talking about a country that's already has food insecurity and great poverty, and then hit by the flood. So just wanted to clarify that, but my question is about the criminal gangs. This is something that I've heard about, but of course nobody's going to tell me about gangs in Pakistan. Can you tell us something about the nature of these gangs? And especially, I know you hope to do more research about the connection between the criminal gangs and some Islamist political groups. But what do you know so far that exists between them?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's from the north to the south. Well, as far as the poverty, yes, post-floods, I think we are going to see a precipitation in these figures. It's not going to be long-term, it's just short-term, but the baseline of the people below the poverty line would remain the same. It could go up to like 2, 3, 4%. It all depends on the coming months, to what extent does the government or the provincial governments help the farmers, those devastated by the floods. As far as the criminal gangs, I have some sort of information on some of the militant groups, for instance in Khyber Agency, which is adjacent to Peshawar, who are being used by transporters, by criminals, as a facade, as a cover, to pocket protection money for the safe passage of goods that are going on to Afghanistan. There are two aspects to it. One is the protection money through the tribal area that some of the groups are pocketing. Abductions, then that is the second element. From inside Peshawar, this is the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, as well as the group that is based in the Khyber Agency. They have been making billions in Pakistan rupees by abducting people. They just abduct people. They know who is who. So occasionally they pick them up and then eventually release them quietly after pocketing some money. In Karachi, I think the lead party, MQM, as well as the Awami National Party, they have these criminal gangs within their ranks. A number of local leaders also, I think, do support that. So you see a lot of target killings as well as target abductions. There was a news making rounds on the internet on one of the blogs which said that the Awami National Party people are also into some of the leaders in Peshawar. They are supporting some of the gangs. So I'm going to actually, don't ask me about too many details. Actually, I told Anita that in the coming months, like coming weeks, I'm going to start a research on this element of the situation in Pakistan.
Be careful.
I'll-
It's very dangerous.
Yeah,
people.
I'll seek asylum in Europe
TTP.
somewhere. Yeah.
But this is not new. I mean, I worked at Harada since 1986, and everyone knows that all of the political leaders in the Punjab are linked to the gangs, and whenever they need something done, they will have something done. I mean, so this is not a new event or a new process. I think it's becoming more intense. But I mean, you know, this is something that's been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, socially this has been going on very well, but right now they have found a very good cover in Karachi or in the tribal areas, in the northwestern areas, the Taliban.
Mhm.
You know, they disguise themselves as Taliban and then conduct these operations. This is something new, the fusion of militancy and crime.
Other questions? Comments up?
Thank you. This role of Supreme Court and this activism, definitely it has perhaps mainly some, positive. But then it looks that it has some, like negative aspects also. Because one thing that many times people feel that Supreme Court and Chief Justice, they like try to undermine that sort of, or downplay like the Parliament, and try to, assume that role, which in fact is the Parliament's role, not the court's role of the Supreme Court. Then also there are many cases it looks that they are being decided in a hurry without due hearing. In some cases it looks that even where judges are like a sort of a party, but still they are hearing those cases. And I sort of get endorsement of this impression by the statements of Asma Jahangir, because I trust her very much that she is not a kind of person that will just irresponsibly say, but she also thinks that in fact the state of affairs with the Supreme Court and all this is not all that good in Pakistan. What do you, look.
Mehreen, you are from Lahore? Okay.
I am.
Look, the lawyers who spearheaded this campaign for the supremacy of the judiciary, for the restoration of the Chief Justice, they are very divided right now. The ruling Pakistan People's Party has managed to divide them. So Asma Jahangir has drifted, I would say, to the Pakistan People's Party camp.
She's contesting an election.
She's contesting the election, and I think they clearly divide the government, or the PPP is supporting her, whereas those people who were instrumental in the restoration of the Chief Justice, they are the opponents. They have been in fact barred from entering the Lahore High Court. So this again reflects this turmoil that the Pakistani society is going through. March 2009, 9th of March, and that was a defining moment for Pakistan. 31st of July, I guess, when the Chief Justice was restored, was another landmark. And I think probably that restoration marked a new beginning, and that is consolidating itself right now. So you will see a lot of upheaval. People, and you will see also a number of, I think, drawbacks in the decisions that the Supreme Court is making. You can say some of the judges are politicized, but in a society which is extremely polarized as a result of 63 years of I would say misgovernance, and with 3 long military interventions, with less number of years going to the civilians, and coupled with the international communities, the American lopsided approach, and I think this has created a lot of distortions within that society. So you will see that there will be a number of subjective judgments. Some of them will be objective, but this was bound to happen. I mean, it's not an ideal society. It's not a stable society. The Supreme Court is still trying to, because it finds itself in direct conflict with the president. I, as a Pakistani, had my own very strong reservations about Mr. Zardari becoming the president as a result of a document. I don't call it a law, National Reconciliation Ordinance, which I personally think was an affront to this nation to the Pakistani nation, and the United States as well as the United Kingdom were partners in that crime, because they are the guarantors of that document, National Reconciliation Order, and that was bound to create ripples within the Pakistani society. And I personally took offense to it. So did millions of people, because you cannot simply condone people for your own interest. It was a time when the United States and the UK, they were really instrumental. They wanted General Pervez Musharraf to ride through to the next phase. So they thought, by allowing Benazir Bhutto, okay, by default, her husband became the president, but by default, I think there were a couple of thousand other people also who managed into the powerhouses just because of one extremely controversial document, piece of it's not legislation, it's a presidential decree. I don't even call it a law. A number of writers and the news agencies, they call it a law, National Reconciliation Ordinance, but no. I think this was an insult to the Pakistani nation, an aberration in this age, and it went against the basic principle of respect for rule of law.
If I can just add to that,
Sure.
just on the same lines, the NRO was shot down by the Supreme Court in December, and Zardari's still fighting it, but I think that's been terrific. And it's the same group of people who shot it down in December, what I was going to add is about the 18th Amendment that's going on right now. I think, if you haven't looked at this is really exciting, because finally it looks like Pakistan's going to have that clause in the 18th, it's going to have a clause in the Constitution removed once and for all, that the army can never constitutionally come back and have a coup d'etat in Pakistan. And that's really exciting.
Oh yeah.
But then the Constitution always said that army cannot come.
No, but the
they
18th
found their way always to come
No,
and
but
make
what-
the judgment that yes, we
But
are
right
the,
n-
we
No,
are
I-
legitimate.
There's something very exciting in terms of the Constitution that's happening right now in the Supreme Court. They've retaken it up again this week after the summer recess, and they're going on about changing this.
Yeah, they were
18th
supposed
Amendment.
to hear it again on the 13th, the day before, but the government has asked, I think, sought for more time.
Yeah.
Right now, that NRO is being discussed in the Supreme Court.
That's fine. I don't know, but you're just adding to what Kamarsov also said. Is Supreme Court the solution of Pakistani problem? How long can it go? We talk about military and we say a lot of things about them, but I think they did some good things also. We came to that we did not find good time for parliament and democracy. Then what democracy we are talking about in Pakistan? If we say like 67 years, we had 37 years for the democracy, so-called democracy. I don't know, definition of democracy is also so contested in Pakistan. And then army, if we compare both, I think army did much better than the civilian governments in many instances. And then we are not satisfied with the parliament, and now we are looking at the Supreme Court. I don't know if Supreme Court can be a solution of all the problems that we already
No, it cannot.
I'm sorry, but I think they're justified in not being satisfied by the parliament. Right?
Nobody is satisfied by anyone.
Well,
Now
look
we
at
are
the parliament.
raising fingerings on Supreme
We
Court
should
also.
not be satisfied
Like
with the
the
parliament.
example of Asma Jahangir. She was on the front line and now she's talking against it. Where the Pakistani nation can get the rescue? From where?
I think
All the three have been criticized so much.
Yeah, but I think this is very natural in a human society. And I think in a situation wherein those who were entrusted with power in the parliament don't behave responsibly, if they flout, abuse their mandate, then somebody has to take, I think, a corrective measure. In this case, nobody will condone the military intervention, and I think a direct military intervention is totally ruled out. Meanwhile, those days are gone. From behind, they will keep manipulating because this is the most disciplined, the largest organized group with tentacles all over the society. They will keep manipulating, and this actually makes it even more pressing for the politicians to behave responsibly. The example that I gave you with this appointment of the managing director of Oil and Gas Development Corporation was one illustration. Second example was an MP, member of the national legislature, with no proper degree. A number of people, probably you all must also have been following the case of the fake degrees, that he resigns under the pressure when the Supreme Court asked him whether you have a proper bachelor's degree. He says no. He resigns, and next day the Prime Minister appoints him as his advisor. Right? He bought his degree. I mean, this itself is a crime, but the Prime Minister deems it fit to appoint him as an advisor with a status of a federal minister. Not only this, a few months later, he's awarded a ticket to contest elections from his constituency again. I mean, where do I stand as a Pakistani? Can I question this Prime Minister who got votes in the name of, like, let's say, good governance and to abide by the Constitution? So the powers of the parliament can't be unquestioned, I would say, in a country like Pakistan. And this man who is not educated, can I entrust him with legislation? He doesn't have the vision and the wisdom to indulge in legislation. So there are educated people within the parliament, but they are very few. So it's a debate, it's a question, I think, which has to be addressed continuously. We will not find an easy answer to this ongoing debate. Mahereen.
I had a question about the electronic media, which you cited as the other source of hope for Pakistan. The way you talked about the interests of the landed aristocracy being in parliament, I wonder if you could tell us more about the electronic media. Like, from what I understand, it's still owned by certain groups. So would it not actually be enforcing and reinforcing some of the class structures in place?
Well, I would say that the Jung group, which is the largest, they consider themselves as the makers and breakers of governments because they own the largest English language newspaper, The News, the largest Urdu newspaper, Jung, a couple of weekly magazines, and of course the GeoTV. And it's a very, very formidable group. They can influence the public opinion across Pakistan. And parallel to them is the Express TV. It's again a big group which publishes a newspaper, Urdu language newspaper, from 11 locations in Pakistan. It is now publishing a newspaper, English language newspaper, Express Tribune, from 2 locations, Karachi and Lahore. Islamabad is going to start, and a television, English language television, 24/7, and Urdu. So these 2 groups have really emerged as the strongest opinion makers as well. And then, of course, there are so far, I think, active almost 50 channels. Out of them, about 15 are very active news channels, and then the rest are like entertainment, infotainment. I think they have also emerged as a big remedy for Pakistan, and not remedy, as a very strong vehicle, basically, for influencing the people, for carrying the public opinion, and for mirroring what is happening. So they put even General Pervez Musharraf, when he was at the height of his power, on the defensive. So regardless of what they do as a group, they will always, I think, go for what the public wants. The public wants justice delivery. They want good governance, and basically, this is what the television is doing: providing a lot of informed debate. I mean, at times it's not informed, I would say, but still a lot of debate on basic issues. Whether it's the conduct of the parliament, the parliamentarians, or the conduct of the government, or at times even the military, I think gets abuses, I would say. Though it's limited, it's still questionable, you know. But I would say that with the passage of time, I think a few years down the lane, even the military wouldn't be spared. So I think the private electronic media, coupled with these big groups, has emerged as a very, very strong vehicle.
And you don't think they'll become the mouthpiece of one of these, the dominant groups in Pakistan?
Which groups? The ruling?
The aristocracy, the military, whichever. Like,
I don't think
for
so.
instance, I've had links with the Indian media, and it professes an extremely corporate line. So that's why I'm getting at. So
This happens everywhere.
right.
You know, you have to look at it in totality. Don't look at one aspect of this. You will always find journalists here in Europe, in Pakistan, in India, who are aligned with one group or the other group, who manage or are able to plant news or views representing a certain lobby, the interests of a certain lobby. But that should not, I think, dilute the overall influence of these media groups. I mean, they are, I think, providing a good service if you look at them in the larger context.
So my question relates to the insurgency and counterinsurgency part of your presentation. You talked about costs, largely, if not entirely, in terms of cost to the state and to its security and various other apparatuses, right? So you flag the fact that there's attacks on security installations, there's microeconomic challenges, tourism has gone down, industry is affected, all of that. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the costs to the tribal regions specifically, or to the Pathan, right? And I ask this question because, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems as if a history of of what we call the tribal areas of Pakistan today is in a sense a history of resistance to outside forces. So what do you think are some of the effects on, tribal structures, political structures, religious authority structures, general societal structures? What's the effect of the insurgency and the state's efforts to counter it? So how has the Pathan suffered?
Requires another presentation. How have the Pashtuns suffered? It's not restricted to the tribal areas alone. Look beyond, across the Durand line. The entire eastern belt of Afghanistan, where these Pashtun tribes are living. It starts from Khost, in North Waziristan, up to Bajawa, to the Hindu Kush. The entire strip is inhabited by the Pashtuns. So it's not only on this side. The conflict happens to be located in the Pashtun belt. I don't buy that Awami National Party theory of the Pashtun suffering. The common Pakistani is equally suffering, I think. It just happens that Mullah Umar belonged to Uruzgan, and that the Taliban movement started in southwestern Afghanistan, in Kandahar. And then obviously it spread across Afghanistan. And the Pashtuns on this side started suffering. Their suffering began when the ISI and the CIA decided to use the tribal areas as a launching pad for the anti-Soviet jihad. As simple as that. And it had a direct impact on the governance structures that the British had put in place in 1901, which is called the Frontier Crimes Regulation, and which accord basically a special status to these regions. Particularly then with the 9/11, in the aftermath of the 9/11, these structures got practically decimated, because with the war on terror, the army moved into the tribal areas, and which basically meant that you are rendering those tribal structures irrelevant, because it was the local area commander, whether it was a major or a colonel or a brigadier, who was calling the shots. And also because until 2004, the army was looking the other way, the intelligence agency, 2004, 2005, the ISI, because of its old connections with a number of militant groups, also with the number of Taliban leaders and with certain Al-Qaeda people who had retreated into the Waziristan region, had taken shelter there. The ISI was looking the other way at that time. And that basically meant that the army simply kept its strategic interests in mind to the detriment of the existing governance structures. Until then, it was very easy, under the existing laws, one clerk of the local administration in a respective tribal region would go after a certain person, regardless of whether he was a common man or a billionaire. He would say, the officer, the political agent wants you in his office at, let's say, midday. The guy would be there. But there was a peace deal in May 2004, the first peace deal between the military and the militants. Naik Muhammad was the militant in South Waziristan. And that basically was a turning point as far as undermining the governance structures was concerned. That a number of people asked the area commander, the corps commander, just to send in for Naik Muhammad to come to the political agent's office and sign the peace deal. But the general said, no, I will travel to his home. So he went to Shakai. So therein, I think he emboldened the militants. They thought, they were something. And there they signed the deal, and thereafter, yes, the Maliks, the local tribal elders, also became irrelevant. So that area, entire region, I think, is in transition. The half of the population is out of the tribal zones, or we call FATA. And what I would say is the only remedy now, what the government can do, is to mainstream integrate those areas into mainland Pakistan. Without that, I don't think much will happen. These areas, the special status of these areas is like an aberration in this age. This aberration must go. And I think, again...
It's a centuries-old aberration, though.
Yeah, whatever.
And didn't exist before.
What is that?
Mughals controlled that area.
Yeah, it
Right,
basically...
but the Pathan always resisted. And were never absorbed.
Who is Pashtun?
But
What
Mughals
happened?
also had the...
And sorry, and before we take, it brings me to your question of the parliament supremacy. The Parliamentary Reforms Committee, which worked on the 18th Amendment, I don't know to what extent are you all aware of that. This Reforms Committee amended about 105 articles of the Constitution. So this committee represented all the parties present in the Parliament. Now, they did not touch the laws that govern the tribal areas. I kept asking. I asked the representatives, all the parties, why didn't you touch it? And they said, well, the army didn't want us to do this. I then spoke with a couple of generals when I was visiting Peshawar, and they said, we gave them only our opinion, that right now it's not good to do, because there is conflict going on. And we did not stop them from doing this, right? So I asked the Awami National Party, the Pashtun nationalists who have been asking for the mainstreaming of these areas. So I then asked its members, did you put it on record? Is it part of the minutes, the proceedings of those committee meetings? He said, no. I said, sorry, I don't believe you. If the army resisted this, opposed it, you should have put it on paper. If not, they could have at least expressed and their intent to go for the amendments into these laws, let's say in 2013. They didn't do this either. So I would say the onus of the responsibility rests on the parliament. Parliamentarians, they missed a big chance, and I cannot excuse them for not having done this.
Okay, we're gonna have to stop now because some people have to leave, but if you want us to discuss some more, Imtiaz Gul will be here until next Monday, and he's giving a presentation tomorrow at the conference, and he's giving a presentation for the Pakistan Student Association on Monday at 4 to 7 or 5 to 7?
At 5 to 7.
5 to 7 in where?
A caucus room, SAC.
Caucus room?
Center.
In the Student Activity Center. And he will also be around on Sunday, so if you're interested, please